Creativity is, by definition, creating something out of nothing.
If you're an artist, you learn that the thing that you think you're creating is not the thing that you end up creating.
The idea of failure in some ways is saying, I had an idea of what I thought needed to happen or what should happen, and it turned out differently. It's actually not failure at all.
This is what art does. Art gets to the soul, gets to the place where values, where relationships, where meaning is made. It's change, evolve, grow, stretch.
The hero is now an integrated person who has let all this unnecessary images of who we thought we were and all these old beliefs have now been burned away, really leaving us in the possibility of integrating our inner lives and our outer lives. And now that the conflict and the challenges are no longer inside of us, the hero can now turn towards his or her destiny, calling, and what the world really needs.
Let's just talk about the return home before we dive into the fruit of all of this. And now maybe we can say that the hero has integrated the inner and outer and is now clear and unconflicted. Is that true to say?
Yeah, I guess so. It's funny when you say it that way. It's like, oh, well, that's a big statement.
Well, it certainly feels that way
like,
for me.
Yeah.
I mean, like in our time, we didn't grow up with Harry Potter, but our kids grew up with Harry Potter, and we've read all the books to them. And I think there's this wonderful, ingenious, but of course archetypal part of that story. When Harry is killed on the battlefield, there's a part of him that's destroyed, that shows up in the train station as the bloody naked thing. So there's part of him that is like gotten rid of.
He had to sacrifice it.
It died.
Yeah.
And so there's this inner turmoil, this worm in his soul is now reconciled and integrated and is no longer a problem. And he's able then to confront Voldemort and win. So there's probably lots of images of the archetypal mythologies where the main scene of the battle is no longer in the soul of the hero.
Right. And I think that's just a good distinction, right? So I'm glad you said that because I think that's really where it's at. It's that that early on in our journey, there's a battle raging in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, this battle is won, as it were. We come through the other side, and then all of what we've gained by this battle inside is now something that we can take out because we no longer have that deep conflict.
Yeah.
The conflict is not inner anymore because we've earned this clarity, and the conflict is still there, but it's now out there. So we return home with an elixir and a willingness to fight for our community and the village or whatever, right?
We're able to then serve because we're not obstructed in our own inner battles.
Right, by the small I and the big I within us,
right,
battling it out.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So
now we can
there's a lot
address
to say on that.
Yeah.
But one thing is just to be really quick and concise about it. That's not to suggest that one reaches a pinnacle and never goes through another ordeal. But certainly I would expect that the other ordeals that one goes through would be at a higher level, so to speak. And that was the way that old initiations were structured too. You suffered through and you went initiated, and you were initiated in yourself, and then you were initiated for your family, and you were initiated for your tribe, and you were initiated for the nation. And so there's that structure there of like, we keep going on this journey. We're not at a finished or end or perfection point. But the internal chaos that led us into that, the tension and the drama of the ordeal, that is now kind of resolved and incorporated, bringing then new gifts that we can serve the world with.
Right. So that is then, how has this given you wings, right? What's happening now? Like.
Yeah, so the big so what?
Yeah. There you go.
When we took the break, one of the things that I came back to was still considering this supreme ordeal. And a bit of sort of the end of that in some ways was finding out how being a filmmaker was going to be beneficial in the world. It was something that I never knew actually until few years ago. And there was still very much the ego involved, right? And I think that was actually one of the major conflicts that I dealt with, was that I want to be of service to the world. I want to be of value, but how is just making another piece of, moving image content going to make the world any better, right? Even if it's a good story, even still, right? I mean, there are a million good stories. If my story doesn't make it out, is the world any worse or better off? No. So I'm going to go back to the wing, sort of the moment where I recognized the wings.
Right.
Okay. What I thought, I'd overcome a lot of the stuff with my mother passing and all this, right? And then I have this conflict with my work collaborators.
Oh, you have not mentioned that
I
yet.
haven't.
No.
Oh, that was...
All right, let's dig in.
Okay. So, I'd basically gotten a dream job, right? I'm making 6 figures. I have a great title, and I am developing and making movies that are being released in theaters around the globe. So this was the big, I've arrived. I feel great, right? I've been struggling for so long, and now I've got this great income, and I've got health insurance. Amazing. And, I love that.
Yeah.
And I go to work, and I'm excited because I'm creating something the world is going to see. And our first movie comes out. Speaking of The Matrix, one of our voice cast was Carrie-Anne Moss.
Who is she? Was she?
She's Trinity.
Oh, she was Trinity.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Who's wonderful. Who's a Waldorf parent, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. She's lovely, and it was just wonderful to work with. But she, so we get this movie, and it goes out, and we're making another movie. And there were problems with the script. So there was this conflict, and at a certain point, I realized it's more important at this moment for me just to keep my job, keep my paycheck, and have some security here, because in my personal life, things are full of turmoil and chaos. Right. So I decided I'm just not going to fight that battle. I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to show up. I'm going to be a yes man and collect my paycheck. And within 2 or 3 weeks, I hated my job and I'm ready to quit.
Whoa,
my
that didn't take
dream
long.
job. A couple of weeks, I'm done. I hate it. I hate going to work in the morning. I can't wait to get out.
No, why?
I've sold out. Right? It's that I am doing my work for a paycheck.
Yeah.
Not because it enlivens me and I'm bringing something to the world. And so within 2 to 3 weeks of being a sellout, I'm ready to quit. And I'm trying to figure out, how can I justify leaving this job when I don't have something lined up? How can I do this? And I hit another sort of small rock bottom professionally. This is terrible. I've arrived and I hate where I've gotten.
Right.
Okay.
A lot of people will resonate with that.
Yeah. And that was the moment where I think I might have told the story of kind of pulling up next to the $150,000 car. And it was, seeing, why is that person unhappy? He should be totally happy. He lives in California. He's driving a $150,000 car. And it was a little bit of then the going through, and there was a small process that get me there. But I just said, at this point, I can't actually show up for the paycheck. I'm going to accept there's a battle on this one project I've lost. But the way that now I can actually justify staying a filmmaker is not only in the stories I tell, because also, as a filmmaker, a lot of times you're telling other people's stories, you're assisting, and even if you are the writer, then maybe there's a director who has another vision and a producer, and she has her vision, and everyone's visions come together, and the main actor comes in and they have their vision. And it's a wonderful collaborative creative process, but it's not necessarily telling the story that I as a storyteller set out to tell. But there is one place where I can make sure that my integrity always shows through.
Which was very important to you, clearly.
Yeah, and it was actually the key, which was that, to me, if I'm going to, it's not just about the story that I tell that goes out on the screen, but what's the story that's happening in the world in which I am operating and living, right? When I'm sitting around a table, and there's another thing that popped up, we're having all these meetings, and we're all white guys writing stories about boys and getting the girl or whatever it happens to be, and it's just, there was a toxicity to it. That I'm now part of this paradigm of continuing to tell these just regurgitated narcissistic stories, maintaining a certain narrow world vision.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to hiring, looking at, what is the diversity of our writing team, the diversity of our art team, the diversity of the directors, the producers. How is this story? What are some of the archetypes in the story? What are some of the assumptions of the story? And I may have told this. A friend of mine who's an A-list writer, he hadn't been working for a little while, and I called him up and I said, hey, I'm working for this Chinese animation studio. We don't have a lot of money, and I know it's, it's six figures on your seven-figure quote, but I think we have a really fun concept, and I'd love you to take a look at it and see if you'd like to write it. Well, he read the concept, said, that's a great concept. I'd love to write it. And he said, just call my agent. I understand what the deal is. I've told him already. I'll take your offer.
Cool.
So we sit down, and this is after I'd given up the idea that on this one project that didn't pass the Bechdel test, I said, you know what? Rather than fighting this old battle, I'm fighting new battles. And this is the putting on of the wings. I meet with my buddy, and I say, okay, here's the story. And I basically laid out all my problems with the past story, all of the movies that we see with 80% of the male characters getting the lines, all of this stuff.
Yep.
I said, so we actually, unless we are actively working on changing it, we're a part of the problem. So here's literature. Here is this, this study from the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. Here is all of this literature. I need you to read this before you start writing. And then 8 weeks later, I get a terrible script back that he did nothing from our conversation.
No way.
Not one thing.
No way.
And I'm frustrated, and he's a big A-lister, and the producer is an A-list producer, and and in the room, when the three of us in the room, even though I brought everyone together, I'm the smallest guy in the room, and yet I still have to go in and say, oh, guys, we have fallen into a trap. And be able to do that without being like, dude, what the hell's wrong with you? Right? But actually bring into a process and to actually have to engage in that artistic process myself and saying, so unfortunately we made this wonderful script that I don't know if or when it will ever be made, but it's a story of a pigeon who's in love with a dove who is in a golden cage in the palace. Right? But the pigeon had a friend, and the first time when he wrote the script, the best friend is a little mouse, and the best friend is a male. Everyone is male except for the love interest, and then the human guy and his love interest. Right? Right. So I said, wait, I get it. I know who the protagonist is. We can't change that. But what we don't ever see, because ultimately the way the story was written, it was kind of a buddy story, right? It was about the pigeon and the mouse and how they have to solve these riddles, right? But we never see a male and a female as best friends in a movie, and even in all of the children's movies, it's the male who's going to go, and at the end, gets the princess or whatever.
Yeah, the female is only ever the love interest.
Right.
She's nothing else.
Right, and so to all of a sudden have,
except in Kiki's Delivery Service.
So
really, I don't remember that one. But anyway, carry on.
But all of a sudden the dynamics of the story are completely different because you have a great female character who's a best friend. And as far as what does that mean to children watching that in the future is that boys and girls, it's okay to have that be your best friend. Yeah. And, the big bull mastiff, of course, is a male character. And I just, how much more interesting is that character when it's a female? And all of a sudden we go through all this stuff, and at the end, then he goes back, and there was a lot of work that came in at the end, comes back in with this wonderful script. Just really, okay, now I can be proud of it.
Correct. So they heard you.
Yes. And it was part of it with the wings, too, was to not be afraid that they're not going to like it. Or, of course, every time I walked into a room and I would bring this stuff up, I'm like, also, a lot of the people I worked with, they all had boys. They all had sons.
Really?
I'm like the only one with daughters, and we're all dudes in this room. Right? How do I press this, right? How do I bring this up without being like, I'm the guy who's advocating I'm only advocating for
Because
the women because I happen to have daughters.
Right,
but that's not
right.
the case. And I just had to actually say, I don't, that all of what the perception, my worry, whatever has to be let go. And so once again, kind of coming back to the wings was, it's not only what stories I tell, but how I tell them, how I am working with others to help their stories.
Yeah.
To the extent that too, I don't have to be the main person in the room. I don't have to be the writer, the director, the producer. I don't have to be any of that stuff, right? That I can actually support others as well and say, I can let my ego go and just say, you know what? If at the end of the day, this movie, someone is a writer and someone is a director and, and I'm one of several producers, that is, that the story that is important to me, that I want, things that I want to bring in the world, doesn't have to have my name on it. It's in the world. And that was this, wow, now I know why I'm doing this.
Right, okay. So was there in there something about you finding your voice?
It was enormously about finding my voice.
So when you found your voice and you spoke up, even though you believed that the odds were stacked against you, even though you did not feel empowered, even though the power dynamics were a struggle, you still spoke up, and that felt enormously empowering. Like the wings are a picture of that, yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It was finding the voice. It was the trusting in really having faith. Like, what am I here for? If I'm here to make money and to be appreciated and acknowledged by the others in the room, well, then I may come in a little bit more timid because I don't want to rock the boat, because I want people to like me and I need to make sure that the paycheck ends up in my bank account every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So it was all of a sudden, and actually it was about finding that purpose. The struggle, it was beautiful. The struggle was really no longer within me. As soon as I said, I'm not here for that.
Out there. Yeah.
Right? I'm not here for that. So I can get fired. I can have everyone in this room turn against me or dislike me. Because I'm not here for that my story has to be told, or that I have to be respected by these people or have this kind of recognition in the world.
Yeah.
I am here to be an agent of change and of that change being to support and to be a voice in the room for people who aren't in the room. Yeah. And I always saw that as an abstraction or as something that was separate from what I did for my career. Right? So my nonprofit work with Network M and We Strive was always that's this other thing I do in my free time between...
Because you really needed to be in service, and you didn't see how you could do that as a filmmaker.
I had no idea, except for the storytelling part. But as most people who work in the creative entertainment fields recognize, that getting your story told when there's just a couple hundred movies made every year in Hollywood and they cost a lot of money, and there's only so much money to go around.
And there are thousands of writers,
there's that story might not get told, but how these stories are told. When I would call agents and I'm looking for a writer, I'm looking for a director or something, it was always, you have to send me equal number of men and women. And sometimes I get, well, I only have one woman. And I said, well, then you only get to send me one guy. Pretty simple. Go out and find more women.
So that's interesting. So you're finding ways to influence the system.
Yeah.
So something that came up for me while you were speaking, which I thought was really interesting, is when you try to show up so that you can get your paycheck. I could just imagine that other people in the room, if you were showing up just for your paycheck and to not rock the boat, that they could so easily see you as not someone who's just showing up to be helpful and not rock the boat, but actually to see you as a problem. And the irony of the situation is that you show up with your voice and I'm going to stand for this, and they see you as an asset. But you don't. Do you see what I'm saying? Like
100%.
Reversal
at
work.
It's a great reversal.
Yeah.
And that was really this whole shift. And then to even see just that as soon as I became more confident in that part of my voice, then this person I've worked with a lot who's always, what about this guy? And I'm always like, how about this woman instead of always this guy? And I'm pushing this. And at one point we get to a project and he goes, we really have to have a woman direct this next project.
And you're like, yes!
As though, it was obvious, you know, and it's even become a part of this a dialogue that he and I have had, and I've then also heard him have with other people. That's like, no, it's as though it's been there always, and it's a total assumption that this is part of the way we consider how we do our hiring and who we collaborate with.
Right.
It wasn't that there was any, in other people around me, there was no conscious, okay, let me write that down, make sure to add that on my list of to-do things. Instead, it was, yeah, of course we consider diversity. That's incredibly important.
Right.
Yeah, we're going to start developing this project about this African-American lawyer in Mississippi. Right? Of course we're going to do that. Like, this is important to be telling diverse stories.
Now, but it's been a real uphill battle to get there.
For me, it was this huge battle.
And we're still not there, obviously.
No, certainly not. I mean, globally, we're a million miles away.
Right.
In certain parts of in certain industries, the conversation is really just starting to happen.
Yeah.
But for me, this thing that has been a part of, that has been so vital in my life, that has caused in the past also a lot of stress and anger, now brings me joy, because even though, sure, I still get angry when I see the statistics and see how discrimination, etc., there's actually this incredible joy because the conflict is no longer in me.
Yeah.
And so therefore the joy can really be in there, because we're talking like, okay, I have this now, and I can go out and I know where my battle is, and I know how to fight it. And once you've actually have that and you're wearing your wings, you have your sword, you have your elixir, the odds are always against you. And in any good battle movie, the big battle is at the end, but we're no longer in despair anymore.
Yeah. We're clear.
Yes.
And we're prepared to give it our all, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, another thing you remind me of, just as a little bit of a tangent, we once had a conversation with a woman who is an expert on diversity. And she had mentioned the difference between, so in terms of racial tension in America, specifically in this case, between whites and African American. And she'd mentioned two words. She'd said, you can either be, if you're a white person, you can either be an ally or you can be an agitator. And I approached her, we were at a workshop together, and I approached her at the end and said, what does that mean? Can you help me understand that better? And she was like, sure, no problem, because she's a trainer in this field. And we spent an hour talking about the difference between ally and agitator. And she said, you can be an ally for people of color, which means, you know, you support them, you're in relationship with them and doing all you can to support them. But an agitator means, as a white person, you go into your institutions where it's all white or mostly white, and you are educated enough, you've educated yourself enough that you can see microaggressions. You can see because the devil is in the details, right? You know and you understand when the forces are arrayed against people of color, and that's what you as a white person change, and that's more powerful and more effective than just being an ally. You can do more, like change the way white people, change the prejudice, change from the inside out. And I found that enormously inspiring, and I'm like, that's what I'm going to do, right? So in your case, it's a little bit the same. You're a man, a white male, and you're in these institutions with white men, right? And we've just the hashtag Me Too, you know, has been splayed across the entertainment industry. So this is really good timing as well. Or your work has really is coming to fruition, but it's still the work, right? You're in these institutions. You can be a part of the change, and in a way, it's really great that you're not a woman doing it. You're a man doing it.
Right. I mean, one key component of our history was this alignment that you referred to, and we didn't realize it at the time. And this is important for you if you're running a business with someone else, or if you're starting a business with someone else, and your partnership is really shaping the DNA of your company. That's just unavoidable, and that's a well-documented phenomenon. But again, it's one of those things that you can study, but when you begin to apply it in your own situation, it can become a tangled mess. I certainly lived through a partnership where we were not aligned, and I had to leave the partnership because because my DNA didn't fit my partner's. And the last few years of Magenta's starting, we didn't have core alignment in some very invisible areas. But when we, through this peeling process that you described earlier so beautifully, when we kind of finally aligned, I mean, on the one hand, I was like, oh, finally, you've arrived. Okay, good. We're ready to go. But on the other hand, I had to look at myself and realize, well, Louisa was able to meet me where I wanted to be met because I was able to meet her where she wanted to be met. You know, when I was able to enter this work and make it not about my person, there was room for her, and she could find her voice, which has been her struggle. So the meeting of the minds and the souls has been this beautiful weaving of each of us transforming so that we could click together, work together fluidly, and not get hung up either in me being too big or you being too withdrawn. And those are the wounds, right? Those are the wounds, those are the compensating coping mechanism behaviors that we got in our childhood, that we brought into our adulthood. And so really the road back on the archetypal, the air quotes, road back in the archetypal journey began with that really profound alignment at many levels.
Yeah.
And then at that moment, everything that we were trying to say for the last 4 years and put on paper and create tools around just lined up beautifully in these simple and clear ways. And the next time I began to talk with a possible client, it was just all there, super clear, could draw it out on a whiteboard and say, here's a problem with normal use cases of this way of working, and here's what Magenta's bringing, here's why it's different. And people got it. Because it was just clear and simple. And like you said, Matthew, I wasn't in the way anymore. And so part of this is, for me, just a newfound joy in this work of both artwork and facilitation and process design for addressing complex social challenges. And I feel unconflicted about it. And the way that that's happening around me or in my life is, for the first time, I do not struggle to be heard. Okay, so when I was 22, 25, 30, 35, I would often find myself in situations where I'd be in a group of people, there'd be a problem to discuss, I would say what I'd have to say, and it would not be heard. And a couple hours would go by, and someone else might even say, hey, we should go back to what Jeff was saying because he really said something. And the whole group would be like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, Matthew. You're like, well done. And for some reason, I was invisible. But now, I can say something, it can land. People go like, that thing that Jeff just said, really, let's apply that. And it's not about me, so I'm not giving myself like big strokes or anything. I don't feel this glow of pride. I don't feel like, oh, you know. I mean, it's not the first time that I've been heard, but it's certainly...
It's consistent and it's solid.
It's consistent and it's solid, and now I can lead. And people are looking to me to lead.
Right.
Important work.
Yeah.
And I'm not struggling with it. I'm not
I would say
worried
that you're
about
in
it.
I'm with it.
I'm in flow with it.
Because you're not attached anymore.
I'm very committed.
You're very committed, but you're not attached.
But I'm trusting it. It's good. It's working. It's so this is new fit, this new flow.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. And also, likewise in the artwork. Art is one of these amazing things in life that the more you do it, the more it opens. And the artwork that I'm making now, I'm always getting better every day, but I'm just so excited to see where it goes. And I just want more time in the studio to make more work and see what happens. And it doesn't feel like a monumental struggle anymore. It looks like finding my language as a painter, finding my visual language. And it's an exciting journey. It's like the culmination of 20 years of trying to find a way to make artwork and speak through art in an efficient way. So yeah, those are two ways that these wings or this return home is happening.
Well, I would say that the experience of wings really centers around finding my voice. How ironic is that? Because I don't actually mean my singing voice, though I do. I mean my speaking voice.
That's happened in parallel.
The singing voice has been this sort of metaphor or analog or whatever it is, alongside the development of my, I don't want to say professional voice, because I don't really distinguish between a professional voice and a personal voice. It's all the same work to me. But definitely it has been finding my voice, and that's played out in our relationship during this sort of supreme ordeal where Jeff and I really went into business together. Before that, he was in Rios and I was doing a lot of coaching, and I was peripherally involved in certain things in Rios, but not very much. But then when he left, we went into business together, and that's when this particular dynamic began, which was, is there room for me in this partnership for my voice, or does it have to be Jeff's voice that I kind of help to bring out? Because that was a bit of a dynamic that I inherited from my parents, and they probably from their parents and so on, these hereditary family dynamic patterns. But that was really a huge question for me, and a huge sort of inner battle. There's my inner conflict. There's not going to be room, or inner fear, there's not going to be room for me to have a voice in this business. It's going to be, I'm going to have to sacrifice that to help Jeff do his thing. So this was a constant refrain of, I'm just helping you do your thing. And Jeff's like, no, is that, it was this constant thing. Anyway, so.
No, that's just your perspective.
And I'm, no.
That's reality.
Yeah.
No, that's just the way you're seeing it.
On and on for years.
That's just the habit.
And I would just loop back to this.
Yeah.
When things got difficult. Or when I got triggered, I should say. I think the breakthroughs, and I imagine that it was a
gradual.
Yeah, a gradual process. But eventually, what I was able to do was come to understand that this isn't obviously about him and me helping him do his thing. And that doesn't need to be my role in the world. That doesn't have to be my life mission, because I was really afraid that that's what I was here to do, was to help the man be amazing in the world, and the woman would be the good woman behind the great man. You know that quote? And it came to pass that I found my voice as a gradual thing. And now, what we're doing now, it really does feel like a partnership, because he brings the things that he has, the strengths that he has, and I bring the strengths that I have. And really, it was never any other way. I always had this voice. It's just that I didn't believe in it. I didn't trust it. I didn't think it was anything of value in the world. And that is tied in to the archetypal struggle of women for the past 3,000 to 4,000 years, which is that women have not had a voice for all this time. So it really did feel like my personal struggle was also an archetypal struggle of womankind. And one thing that I think really brought our work into focus is that both Jeff and I, Jeff as well, even though he is a male, that we both, with Magenta, really do represent this archetypal feminine voice. This work that we're doing, World Maker, the social sculpture consulting work that we're doing, is really about the feminine. It's about the inner life that has been dismissed, called subjective, cannot be known for centuries, millennia. And now we are saying, no, it is the inner life that is shaping our outer reality. And we need to become masterful there in a creative way. And we need to, together, co-creatively shape our inner realities so that we can address the conflict out there in the world, which, by the way, was caused by the inner life at scale. And I find this a very feminine, archetypal feminine gesture, in a way. So it's like, it is my personal struggle, but it has also felt like more than just me.
You know, it's interesting because we've actually, all three of us just talked about finding our voice.
Yeah.
You know, that was, as part of the finding our wings, the elixir was actually about the voice, which I'm kind of relating back to when you actually know what it is that you need to do, then it becomes very clear, right? Mm-hmm. There's not, the doubt falls away, and that actually, I know I still struggle with it. When I have conflict that I don't want to deal with, my voice shifts.
Mm-hmm. It goes you start clearing your throat.
Mm-hmm. It goes all of a sudden, I go into this
That's what you do.
place way back into my throat like this.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
I remember for you that you did some writing and some course design for a client, and you brought it to me, and I was like, wow, that sounds perfect. I'm going to sign off on that. Great job. Mm-hmm. And it just like these things that you didn't think you could do, mm-hmm. you went and did, and I thought they were perfect. And I don't know, was that, for me, those were indicators that you were finding your voice.
Yeah, and it has to do with presence. So one of the things that wounds and also trauma will do is we cannot really be present in the here and now while we are standing in our wounded place. So long as I was afraid, and so long as I didn't have the confidence, I had too much self-doubt, I couldn't find my voice. I didn't know what my voice was. I didn't know how to speak. I was shut down. So, and the other thing that I experienced from my own set of wounds was this fog. It's like when I was in this space of self-doubt, there would be like this fog that would be around me, and I would wrestle and struggle with the fog, trying to find clarity, and I just couldn't find it. In the process of finding my voice, and there's too many little pieces to sort of say how I did that. But in the process of doing that, the fog began to lessen and go away. And the more I practiced my voice, the more present I could be. So it was not easy. Some of the things some of the booklets and so forth that I produced, it was a little bit like trying to squeeze blood out of a stone. But the practice of it was what helped me to find my voice. Does that make sense? I was clear at least that I had to do it because I had to have a voice.
Yeah.
And then the practice of it was what was a part of what gave me the confidence. I did it. Okay, I could do it again. And right? It was that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You said something right at the beginning when you started that of the trauma kept you away from being present.
Yeah.
Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
In some ways, the trauma keeps us part of us back.
Yeah.
There, right? You see a lot of times there can be a certain arresting of the development of people when they have an early trauma.
Yeah.
Right? And it says there's part of you stays back there. So how can you be fully here now in this moment if there's a part of you that's still staked in the ground, and that actually part of the healing of that trauma and working with those patterns and actually recognizing those patterns. I see you, I can name you, and now you don't have control over me, and that can free that traumatized part of you to come back here. And sometimes it might get pulled back again through these old patterns, but the recognition of that, right?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading about healing from trauma lately, and it is a process, and there's lots of different modalities depending on the person and their and their tendencies and their particular trauma. Different kinds of modalities will work in different ways, but it very much is like that. A part of you, there's a fracturing in the soul, and the work of healing from trauma is to reintegrate those fractured parts. And the fracturing is this the incredibly wise nature of the soul. The fracturing is necessary to help someone survive the unsurvivable, the horrific. And it's a protective mechanism that is just amazing and profound. But in the research that reintegration it is difficult and requires like somatic kind of healing, and it requires integrated family systems type approaches. There's a lot of different amazing research that's been done. But it's worth doing, because being present, like the work that Jeff and I do of process design and facilitation in the consulting work, for instance, or in teaching in workshops and groups, despite all this, experience, and despite all this IP and expertise or whatever it is that we value in a professional or in a consultant, it's all good and needed. But what is mostly needed is presence, is how you're showing up. It's not so much the what, it's the how. I have found that when I'm showing up for a workshop, or I'm teaching, or I'm coaching, the best thing that I can do is just be present. And when Jeff told me this, you taught me that, years ago, I didn't believe him. I thought I had to be an expert in something, and that was how I would put myself down. I'm not an expert in anything. No one cares about playing the violin.
Or being a mom.
Or being a mom. Or trying to sing. So, and he said, you just need to be present. And that is true. I've come to understand that is true.
Your gift of presence is 80% of holding a room, facilitating a process. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are technical things to learn. Yes, there's design things to learn. But you can learn all that and not have presence, and you will not be any good. And if you don't know all that, but you do have presence, you can go a long way.
Right. But that really struck me, because that was the antidote to my self-doubt. If all I have to do is show up, okay, I can at least do that,
Is there any last sort of thought on the sort of that elixir and the returning home?
I mean, I guess I have one, which is that in the community of part of this return from the ordeal is rejoining your community. And
that's a good point.
Some of the people that do the systems work with us, we've known for 20, 25 years. And we've been tracking together. And that is a very interesting point to re-engage. And when I left Rios, Louisa was really instrumental in a soft and friendly divorce of the partners. But I have to admit that for a few years I carried a lot of resentment and kind of had a story about being disallowed or kicked out of the firm or whatever. Now that's not actually what happened. I outgrew and they outgrew, and we just grew apart. And so
if you ever had any alignment in the first place.
We didn't, and that was part of the weird situation was that we were thrown together, and I think we gave each other a lot, and I still really love those partners and really admire them and think of them a lot, and grateful to everything that they gave me. So, but now part of this Wings is that I not only my old partners, but people I've known in this field for a long time, I just don't judge. I just don't judge. I really see, having suffered my own shortcomings, when I think of them or see them, I'm just not interested in judging or comparing or evaluating or being better than or competing or
but more
comparing.
Carry on.
But I'm truly interested in their becoming and who they are and who they are becoming. And there's this real feeling of solidarity and warmth and interest and
re-engagement.
And I mean, that's not true for every single person I've ever met in this space, but it's certainly true of many. And now I just don't have any mental space taken up with comparing or contrasting or judging or evaluating.
Right, or even any of the old resentments, right?
Yeah, it's just not there. It's like I've got other fish to fry, so I'm not there.
Which is actually kind of that's a real lovely sort of pullback, which is that actually when we leave something and there's a wound, whether it's our childhood or as we begin on our journey, for you the beginning of the journey obviously was around that same time and meeting some of these people, right? And there are these wounds that come and these the conflicts that come, and we carry some of that stuff with us as baggage that we take with us. And part of coming through the fire, right, is actually burning that out and be able to come back and say, whatever happened before, like, hey, I'm sorry for my idiocy in this, and I've completely forgiven you for your transgressions or my perception of what you did as a transgression. And I would say, you know what? We're actually all on this journey together.
And that's actually happened with a dear friend who has another company in this space, and we had a big blow up. It was a big dramatic thing, and years later we came to that thing of just forgiving and realizing that we were much better off friends and brothers than bitter at each other.
And that's a total capacity that is just, I think is a really important piece of this, right? Because then we can come back in, and maybe that's also part of the burning away of the ego, right? Because now we're actually here for something bigger than just ourselves.
That battle,
Right?
Yeah.
So that was the only last piece that comes up, is just that re-engagement with the community in that on another level.
Yeah.